to today's episode of Mental Health is Horrifying. I'm your horror Barbie host of darkness, Candace Green, psychotherapist and all-around spooky bitch, podcasting from my bat-filled cave in Toronto, Canada. I've been noticing I've been having a feeling for quite some time, and until recently, I hadn't been able to quite put my finger on it. But by literally 8 a.m., I felt like I was completely overwhelmed. I was getting headaches, I was irritated with everything, and I felt an existential anxiety that felt very generalized, but also like a large cape hanging over my otherwise contented little life. I needed to get to the bottom of this. What was happening to me? So I started looking at my routines and how I was spending my time, and I began to realize I'm opening up my phone every morning and spending my first hour or so of wakefulness injecting the most overstimulating lowbrow garbage directly into my prefrontal cortex. No wonder I felt like the world was a horrible, overwhelming place by 8 a.m. I began to realize that due to the ubiquity and normalization of our enmeshment with the digital world, I was constantly overstimulated. On the note of overstimulation, I've decided that I want to give myself the gift of peace and presence this summer. So until Halloween, and maybe longer, we'll see how she goes, I'm going to be releasing one episode per month of Mental Health is Horrifying. I do this entire thing myself, and while I absolutely love it, it's a lot of work. And I want to A, go look at some trees, and B, start planning for Halloween. Feeling overstimulated and noticing how bad it is for you is something that the people of Springfield can identify with when their town is invaded by giant, monstrous advertising mascots. Okay, so let's get right into it. Let's check out Treehouse of Horror 6, Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores, and its portrayal of the detrimental psychological impacts of living in an overstimulating society.
Good morning, everybody. Panic is gripping Springfield as giant advertising mascots rampage through the city. Perhaps it's part of some daring new ad campaign, but what new product could justify such carnage? A cleanser? A fat-free fudge cake that doesn't let you down in the flavor department like so many others? Let me go! No! Stop! No!
Homer goes to Lard Lad Donuts to get a colossal donut. Upon realizing that the colossal donut is the name of the donut that Lard Lad holds and that the actual donut size does not exist in this format, he denounces the store and vows to get his colossal donut. He returns that night and steals the giant donut from the Lard Lad statue in front of the store. In the midst of a freak storm, Lard Lad and the other giant advertising statues come to life and terrorize Springfield. At Marge's insistence, Homer eventually returns the donut to Lard Lad, but that does not stop Lard Lad and his friends from causing destruction. Lisa goes to the ad agency that created the advertising characters, and an executive suggests that the citizens just stop paying attention to the monsters altogether, as they are advertising gimmicks, and attention is what keeps them motivated. He suggests a jingle that will help distract people from watching the monsters. So Lisa and Paul Anka rally the townspeople and perform the jingle they created called Just Don't Look, encouraging the citizens of Springfield to stop looking at the monsters, who, when they do, lose their powers and die. When you wake up first thing in the morning, what do? You probably reach for your phone and see what notifications you have, and you toggle between Instagram and TikTok and email, and maybe Slack is in there and LinkedIn.
For the professional shouties.
And the weather, and maybe Reddit, and the news, and then suddenly it's not even 8 a.m. and you feel homicidal. You might start saying to yourself, ugh, I hate everyone, humans are the worst, I'm so mad, and the world is a horrible place. And of course, the world has its problems, but what might actually be happening is that you're overstimulated. Overstimulation occurs when a person's brain receives too much sensory input to process effectively, leading to a sense of overwhelm. Things that can cause overstimulation include anything that affects the five senses. So this can include things like bright lights, loud sounds, strong odors, too much caffeine, or increasingly, as is the focus of this episode, content and data from our digital lives. Our brains are great multitaskers, but even still, we can only perceive, categorize, and sort up to 40 pieces of information at any one time. But we may be exposed to close to 11 million pieces of information per second. Overstimulation is very common among those with ADHD, autism, and highly sensitive people, but is increasingly becoming the societal issue of the day for the majority of people as our daily lives become more and more enmeshed with the ubiquity of technology. This has very serious implications, not only for our ability to think deeply, focus, and learn, but also for the sheer quality of our lives and mental health. We are now more or less in perpetual states of overstimulation, and it is becoming harder and harder to create digital boundaries, like Lisa Simpson or Paul Anka suggest, by just not looking.
Then take a tip from Mr. Paul Anka!
To stop those monsters, 1, 2, 3, here's a fresh new way that's trouble-free. It's got Paul Anka's guarantee.
Guarantee void in Tennessee. Just don't look, just don't look. Just don't look, just don't look. Just don't look, just don't look.
These days, I think we overstimulate ourselves both unintentionally and intentionally, or at least from a subconscious place of intentionality. When I think about a lot of this being unintentional, this is when I put on my damn the man, save the empire hat and acknowledge that tech companies have become more powerful than most governments. They face few regulations and every day are basically experimenting with technologies and algorithms that shape the way we communicate, feel, react, respond, learn, and experience our lives as humans. Even if you wanted to, it's becoming increasingly difficult to decouple yourself from your smartphone. For example, I was visiting a relative recently and was parking on the street, but the only way I could park on the street in this small town was to download an app on my smartphone to pay for the spot. I went between staring at the parking meter that was firmly installed into the sidewalk that likely had not been used since the early 2000s, RIP, and the newer parking sign that told me to download this godforsaken app. What if I didn't have a smartphone? What if I just didn't want to have to install yet another app on my phone in order to live? What happened to parking meters? Remember when you could just put in change and park and live your life? But beyond parking, there are just certain digital realities that exist in our world now. If you want to keep in touch with your friends and family, you are probably texting them or have a group chat, and there are notifications popping up on your phone throughout the day. Your job, no doubt, has some kind of digital component to it, and there are fewer and fewer boundaries these days between work hours and personal time. Digital screens now fill waiting rooms and subway platforms, public libraries, and virtually every public space we live in. And we are also deliberately drowning ourselves in overstimulation too. This is opening and refreshing your social apps over and over and not even knowing what you're looking for or why. This is the inability to wait for your friend at the cafe without pulling out your phone. This is doom scrolling for hours after work until you look up and realize that the sun has gone down. There is good psychological evidence to suggest it is often a coping mechanism to avoid facing certain thoughts or emotions. In other words, overstimulating ourselves can be an attempt to self-medicate against our own memory and consciousness, filling our minds with external stimuli so there are no resources left for the internal things we wish to escape. Perhaps you are familiar with French philosopher Blaise Pascal's famous quote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." Damn, Blaise, why you gotta read us like that? This relief from our own consciousness is temporary, of course. You might know this as getting that quick dopamine hit, but once we put down the device and return to ourselves in the real world around us, the suppressed thoughts flood back in, and now the paradox is that they might be even more dysphoric, as there is a connection between overstimulation and understimulation or worsening of anxiety or existential dread, which we'll look at a bit more later. The other reason why we purposely overstimulate ourselves is that the pattern of chasing constant stimulation becomes habitual the more we expose ourselves to it. Think about how we reach for our smartphones like a phantom limb, not even knowing why we're reaching for it or what we need to check. An overtaxed brain becomes even more distractible, entering a vicious cycle. As working memory nears capacity, we find distractions more distracting, and it becomes harder to distinguish relevant information from irrelevant information or signal from noise. In an overstimulated state, the mind's filter falters. Everything blurs together as noise. FYI, a good portion of my research for this episode comes from an incredible and horrifying book I read by Nicholas Carr called The Shallows: What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. I highly recommend this book to everyone because I think it's really important to understand what the digital age is doing to our brains. In his book, Nicholas Carr works closely with neuroscientists to explore the question, as we enjoy the net's bounties, are we sacrificing our ability to read and think deeply? The answer is yes. But even though I'm telling you that the answer is yes, the whole point of his book is that the internet has made us value deep thinking and learning less, and that we prioritize skimming rapid, distracted pieces of small bits of information from many sources. His findings show that we are losing our capacity for connection, contemplation, and reflection. So don't be skipping out on reading this book, or any other book for that matter. Go to the library, people. All right, let's talk about the attention economy, because I think this is important to understand too from the perspective that while a lot of overstimulation is an intentional attempt to distract us from our own inner worlds, it's also important to note that your mind and attention have now become a commodity. The term attention economy was coined by psychologist, economist, and Nobel laureate Herbert H. Simon, who posited that attention was the bottleneck of human thought that limits both what we can perceive in stimulating environments and what we can do. He also noted that a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention, suggesting that multitasking is a myth. Later, in 1997, theoretical physicist Michael Goldhaber warned that the international economy is shifting from a material-based economy to an attention-based economy, pointing to the many services offered online for free. That's what he said in 1997, okay? As fewer people are involved with manufacturing and we move away from an industrial economy, emerging careers work with information. Although the information economy is a common name for this new state, Goldhaber rejects this. Information is not scarce. Attention is. In the attention economy, attention is not only a resource but a currency. Users pay for a service with their attention. Today, the dynamics of the attention economy incentivize companies to draw users in to spend more and more time on apps and sites. Designers who create sites and apps understand that their products vie for the limited resource of users' attention in a highly competitive market. Bo Burnham summarized this point really well, and terrifyingly well in a sense too, in a talk on his film 8th Grade, talking about how we used to colonize land, but now they are colonizing our minds.
They're coming for every second of your life. That's what these companies are coming to. This company as well. And it's not because anyone is bad. It's not because anyone in this company has evil plans or is trying to do this. They're not even doing it consciously. It's because these companies like Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and everything, they went public and they went to shareholders. So they have to grow. Their entire models are based off of growth. They cannot stay stagnant. We used to colonize land. That was the thing you could expand into. And that's where money was to be made. We colonized the entire earth. There was no other place for the businesses and capitalism to expand into. And then they realized human attention, that they are now trying to colonize every minute of your life. That is what these people are trying to do. Every single free moment you have is a moment you could be looking at your phone and they could be gathering information to target ads at you.
For me, one of the biggest downsides of using social media platforms in their current iterations is that intentionality is lost. A few years ago, the intention, at least for me, was that I wanted to see what my friends, family, or people that I was intentionally interested in were up to. I follow certain artists, authors, and witches that I gain incredible inspiration from, and I want to see what they have to say. But sometime around COVID, social media platforms, aware of the economic opportunity of monetizing all our focus and attention, began gearing their platforms more towards advertisers and growth, where now your attention is the product they are selling. Now, I am inundated with information and content that I have zero interest in seeing, and that is actually harming or upsetting me. I have no idea why I know about Kris Jenner's facelift. Like, I actually don't care at all, and I think the Kardashians are a plague on society. But for some reason, it has shoved this information into my face over and over again, leading to further content suggestions about how women's faces are hideous in general and all require a surgical intervention in order to be palatable to onlookers. It is introducing new anxieties and insecurities that literally weren't even there before, which is actually their whole intention. In Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores, there are innumerable giant mascots clamoring for the attention of the people of Springfield, creating a monstrous invasion into their community. While there may be individual benefits to creating or even engaging with stimulating media, the collective impact is one that decreases the overall welfare of the society. A single advertisement or piece of content from either an individual or a business might be valuable because it conveys useful information. For example, Chief Wiggum might be throwing a birthday party for Ralph and appreciate seeing the Lard Lad donut mascot because, wouldn't donuts be a great idea for Ralph's party? Or Helen Lovejoy might need a new carpet for her house and find it useful to see that Aladdin Magic Carpets and Linoleum is having a sale. But when all of these mascots come alive and are placed in such close proximity to one another, while the set may lead to more information-rich environment, such an environment becomes so distracting, overwhelming, attention-grabbing, and in this case murderous, so as to lower the welfare of the citizens of Springfield. What this means is that we cannot assume that a comprehensive system of individually valuable stimuli is socially valuable, and we must seriously consider the need to rationally trade off between the presumed good of consuming content and the presumed detriments of being overstimulated. And let me tell you, being constantly overstimulated, such as we are in these days, is very bad. The costs are subtle, hard to grasp, and not immediately apparent. When we're on our phones and see a silly meme, or now more likely a piece of brain rot AI like Snoopy with an erection, someone might experience this as stimulating and get a ping of excitement in the moment. In Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores, the harmful impacts of these overstimulating advertisements becomes clear. They start destroying the town, people's home, and one of them kicks a poor dog. But in our world, it's difficult for the person looking at brain rot AI or a constant stream of 15-second videos to see past these momentary benefits and take stock of the cost of disruption in terms of their patterns of thought, the possibly detrimental neurological changes from screen exposure, and opportunities missed to engage in more valuable activities such as enjoying conversation with family or friends, or in harvesting dirt from their local graveyard. The costs are spread across the population, such that no specific group is acutely motivated or even aware of the need to speak up. Constant stimulation via digital media, multitasking, and ambient noise dilutes the contrast between signal and noise, as we learned from Nicholas Carr in The Shallows already, which reduces memory clarity and learning depth. In contrast, deliberate sensory reduction, like silence, solitude, and monotony, activates introspective cognitive processes, supports memory consolidation, and fosters future-oriented consciousness. Quiet attention enhances educational outcomes, productivity, and cultural development. In The Shallows, Nicholas Carr describes how excessive input overwhelms our working memory, which is essentially like the brain's RAM, causing new information to overflow without sticking. When the brain's capacity is exceeded, we struggle to transfer information into long-term memory or link it to existing knowledge. Carr explains that under high cognitive load, we fail to form rich connections or schemas with what we already know, leaving our understanding shallow. In short, sensory and information overload make it difficult for experiences or study material to imprint as lasting memory. We might read an article or attend a lecture while our phone buzzes or music plays, but later find that little of that lecture was actually retained. Think about the times that you have spent scrolling on social media and suddenly you notice that hours have gone by and you think, okay, what was I looking at? You can't even remember. Constant stimulation keeps us in a state where we are reacting rather than reflecting, making it difficult to process, think deeply, or envision. Our impulse to seek stimulation can directly undermine the conditions needed for deep learning. Often, learning requires us to sit with difficulty, to wrestle with a tough problem, to read a really dense article, or to reflect on feedback that might make us uncomfortable. These moments naturally invite mental friction or even boredom. Instead of pushing through that discomfort to learn deeply, the modern mind has an easy escape hatch. Open another tab, check social media, or doom scroll. The constant toggling and sensory input prevents you from ever reaching a state of deep concentration or flow where real learning happens. One of the most horrifying parts for me when I was reading The Shallows was when they interviewed a high school student who did not see any point or value in reading books, because any information that he wanted to know could be quickly obtained and summarized through digital tools available today. Through this devaluing of deep learning, processing, and envisioning, we are becoming mindless consumers of data, always busy taking in fragments of information, but rarely processing any of it in a meaningful way. Overstimulation is a state of moving past the hyperarousal response of the nervous system to the point of being unable to effectively take in or process more sensory information. We tend to think of this purely as a hyperaroused state, but there is actually a connection between overstimulation and boredom, or a type of hypoarousal. When we purposely overstimulate ourselves in lieu of having the proper resources to cope with existential anxiety and the banality of everyday life, we turn to our devices, social media, and endless, meaningless scrolling, which leads to hypoarousal and feelings like listlessness, depression, and boredom. But it's more than that, right? It's like this kind of spiritual malaise, this feeling of like, is this really the reality that we're living in? Ugh. People are not bored because of an excess of leisure, like, wouldn't that be great? But rather because they have lost connection to any deeper or spiritual meaning to life to counter this ennui. Part of what's going on here, I think, is that there is a lot of quantity out there, but not a lot of quality. There is a rise in a type of content that is literally called brain rot AI, which I spoke about earlier when I mentioned Snoopy and his erection, which shares a definition similar to that of an actual virus, which is that it is content that is created with the sole purpose of going viral. And it goes viral because they are these really bizarre looking videos like SpongeBob slowly morphing into a bunch of hamburgers, and then he invades a McDonald's and starts smashing everything. There is an entire subgenre of popular brain rot AI of animals turning into food, like a zebra turning into a pizza or a dog turning into a ham. It's gross. This type of content goes viral because of its strange subject matter and composition, so your brain wants to continue watching it to try to understand what is happening, and of course, the longer you watch it, the better it is for the views and clicks and all that kind of viral business. These videos are now being created by brain rot content farms that are proliferating widely, where apparently they are also teaching people how to make their own brain rot AI. And If that isn't depressing, I don't know what is. Just think about that word, brain rot. Our brains are out here rotting. We used to value art, thinkers, literature, beauty, but it seems our values have become corrupted. In the 50s, Norbert Wiener, a mathematician and philosopher, sparked the field of information ethics, also known as computer ethics or cyber ethics. He recognized the potential societal impact of information technology and explored its ethical implications and how information technology might alter key human values such as happiness and freedom. It doesn't really seem like our society values happiness and freedom as the goal anymore, does it? I can't even begin to comprehend what values content like brain rot AI connect to, but it's concerning to say the very least. I really hope that for current and future generations of mental health professionals and their clients that are being trained right now, that curriculums will contain mandatory sections on the impacts of smartphones and social media on our mental health. In my opinion, it's one of the biggest threats to our psychological well-being today, and I think the most insidious part of it is that we don't recognize how bad it is for our health, and our enmeshment with these platforms has become so normalized, whereas it is creating truly antisocial behavior patterns and dysfunctional human beings. At its worst, if you've watched the new tech bro satire film called Mountainhead with my boyfriend Steve Carell, it is at risk of creating total geopolitical unrest and collapse. If you've ever watched Mad Men, it reminds me of when it was the 1960s and researchers and health authorities were just beginning to ring the alarm about the negative health implications of smoking cigarettes, and people, aka big business, were waving them off and not taking them seriously. And we're like, okay, yeah, whatever, smoke your cigarettes, it's manly, and the ladies will lose weight. I'm worried that we don't know how to put this genie back in the bottle. In therapy sessions, I sometimes ask clients to either zoom out or zoom in. When we zoom out, the issue of overstimulation and digital enmeshment can feel quite terrifying, or like we are powerless to resist an inevitable takeover by our digital overlords. So I'd like to ask you to zoom in, or more specifically, like Paul Anka and Lisa Simpson suggest, just don't look. You do still have personal autonomy. You do still have the ability to determine how you spend your time, what the quality of that time is, and what your values are. This begins with having strong boundaries with yourself. One of my favorite artists is named Olivia Faust. She is an artist local to my province of Ontario, and she creates the most beautiful haunted artwork. A few weeks ago, she took what she called a dream week, and it was a week that she began taking every quarter totally off social media. She now uses that week to look at art books, watch films, experiment in her sketchbook, try out new mediums, and fill herself up with inspiration. She acknowledges that artists need quiet time, time alone, time to create art that is seen by no one's eyes but their own, and most importantly, time to daydream. Olivia really has the right idea here, because sensory restriction allows the brain to restore its default mode, process, and amplify experiences of the inner world. When external input quiets down, the brain compensates by turning up the volume on subtle internal signals. This may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if this was the thing you were trying to avoid, and like Blaise Pascal suggested, but it is a necessary process for optimal brain functioning and mental well-being. Neuroscientists have found that the brain has a default mode network that becomes active in moments of restful wakefulness, essentially when we are not focused on external tasks. In silence or idle moments, the brain's default mode kicks in to internalize and evaluate information, integrating it into a conscious workspace. In practical terms, that means when you sit quietly, you begin to process and synthesize experiences, reflect, and consolidate memory. We also become better able to differentiate between signal and noise through this process of reflection and consolidation, regaining the ability to differentiate between what is important and what is just noise. In one notable finding, researchers observed that in silence, the brain can let down its sensory guard and actually restore some of what was lost through excessive noise. This suggests that quiet time isn't just neutral or not doing anything or not being productive. Quite the opposite. It actively helps the mind to reset and fortify itself. On a neurological level, silence has even been linked to the growth of new brain cells. A 2013 study found that mice exposed to daily periods of silence experienced development of new neurons in the hippocampus, a region critical for memory and learning. Silence can literally grow your brain. And just to be clear, I don't support animal testing. The true flex, the true heavy metal lifestyle these days is honestly just sitting in silence. Nothing. No stimuli. Just sit with your thoughts. You can look at a tree or a creek, but not a phone. I dare you to try. Ironically, the week that Olivia Faust did her Dream Week was the same week that I also took for myself and deleted Instagram from my phone. At first, I experienced that phantom limb thing where I kept wanting to check it by default for absolutely no reason whatsoever, and it was interesting to notice this somewhat automatic default in myself, and also how disturbing it is that this is how I'm programmed now. But slowly, I stopped reaching or wanting to check at all. I was free, and all of the anxieties I had in my mind that had previously felt so big but shapeless and non-specific started melting away as I was able to differentiate signal from noise, think more clearly about what was important to me, and engage with the activities and things I find inspirational and fulfilling. This is why things like mindfulness, meditation, saunas, cold plunges, and all kinds of IRL connective experiences are becoming more and more popular as we, years later, emerge from the fog of a both isolated and overwhelmed COVID age. Sometimes I do this exercise with myself. I record how I feel before opening social media. I scroll through social media as I normally would, taking in what the app is serving to me, both on my regular feed and that horrific For You page. Then I close social media, and then I record how I feel after. I try to notice what has changed. 11 times out of 10, I am more anxious after using social media for absolutely no reason other than I have become overstimulated by completely inane, low-quality noise. I urge you to please consider your relationship with your smartphone, social media, and being perpetually connected or on. I think about Garden Song by Phoebe Bridgers, where she says, "When I grow up, I'm going to look up from my phone and see my life. That's so sad because it's like, please don't wait. Your life is happening now, and your quality of life is so important. Tech companies are changing what we value as a society, but you can still decide what you value and what you want to prioritize. It's getting harder and harder, but I promise you the fight to reclaim your time and peace of mind is worth it. In Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores, the advertisement monsters literally perish when everyone stops looking at them. I love to imagine a world where we all as a collective decide that we are going to stop using these platforms and they just collapse. I don't know if I'm a pessimist, but I'm not sure if that will ever happen. But what I do know is that you do still have personal autonomy. What did you value in your childhood? I have the privilege of having had a childhood free of smartphones and social media. I valued reading. I have always been a voracious reader, and there was definitely a period in my life where I realized my attention was clawed away by social media, and I really wasn't reading that much, which I view as a huge loss. Since I have become more aware and mindful of my smartphone usage, I am back to reading 3 to 4 books a month, and my brain has never felt more nourished. I am not only a better person for myself, my friends, my family when I pay attention to my values and prioritize quiet and quality, but I'm a better therapist. I'm more regulated, I'm smarter, I'm more present and empathetic. I value peace and quiet. I value summers spent wandering while enjoying parks and the beauty held within the province where I live. I like watching movies completely uninterrupted, so I can get lost in whatever world I am immersed in. Please don't allow your values to get corrupted. You don't have to look. That, my ghouls, is the story of Treehouse of Horror 6, Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores, and how we are living through a crisis of overstimulation. Mental Health is Horrifying is entirely researched, written, edited, and produced by me, Candace Green, registered and spooky psychotherapist. If you like this podcast, please consider rating and reviewing on your preferred listening platform. It really helps the show to reach all the other spooky ghouls out there, and I will be eternally grateful. And an eternity is a very long time for a vampire, okay? If you live in Ontario and or Toronto and are interested in psychotherapy with me, I offer both virtual and in-person therapy for final girls and haunted houses who want to make sense out of the guts of their lives. I specialize in grief and trauma and incorporate both tarot and dream work into my practice as tools to delve deeper into fields of psychic terrain. You can follow me on Instagram at Mental Health is Horrifying, and you can also learn more about me and my services through my website, manymoonstherapy.com. Or you can also howl at the moon and I will hear your call. Bright blessings.